At exactly 6:42 a.m., the revolving doors of the Grand Europa Hotel turned as they always did, pulling in cold air, travelers, and untold secrets. Behind the reception desk stood a woman no one paid attention to, calm, polite, efficient. To the guests, she was just another hotel employee starting her shift. To Mossad, she was a silent intelligence platform placed at one of the most underestimated observation points in Europe. Hotels were not neutral spaces. They were crossroads where diplomats, couriers, fixers, and men living under borrowed names passed through without raising alarms. By the late 1990s, Mossad analysts had realized that an enemy logistics network had abandoned safe houses and instead relied on respectable international hotels, places where anonymity was natural and questions were rare. Traditional surveillance failed because following suspects triggered countermeasures, wiretaps produced fragments without structure, and border monitoring revealed movement but not intent. The breakthrough came with a simple realization: the person who saw everyone, every day, without ever being remembered, was the receptionist. The agent chosen for this operation was not selected for aggression or force but for her ability to disappear into routine. She possessed an unusual calm, an exceptional memory for faces and behavior, and a talent for emotional neutrality that made people speak freely around her. During training exercises, other operatives unknowingly revealed sensitive information in her presence, assuming she was irrelevant. That trait defined her future. Instead of chasing targets, she would let them come to her. Her cover was built over 18 months, not as a disguise but as a real-life, hospitality education, authentic work history, verifiable references, and a background so ordinary it attracted no curiosity. When she applied to the Grand Europa Hotel, a location strategically positioned near diplomatic districts and major transit routes, her hiring raised no internal discussion. She was forgettable by design. From her first day behind the desk, she treated the job exactly as expected. She smiled, typed, apologized for inconveniences, and solved minor problems. At the same time, she began quietly absorbing patterns that no system logged: which guests insisted on cash payments, who avoided cameras instinctively, which rooms were repeatedly requested, and which names vanished and reappeared weeks later. She remembered people not by how they looked, but by how they behaved: the man who checked his watch before speaking, the woman who never removed her coat indoors, the guest who refused housekeeping yet stayed for extended periods. Within days, she understood that the reception desk was not customer service, it was a behavioral observatory. The first real signal came during a quiet afternoon check-in. A man presented a passport that had appeared before in intelligence databases, not as a criminal, but as a connector, someone who moved between operations without carrying incriminating material. His requests were ordinary: a mid-level room, late checkout, no cleaning service. But he asked one subtle question that mattered: who worked the night shift? Not names, not numbers, just who. The agent answered casually, smiled, and handed over the key card, while mentally flagging the reservation. From that moment, the operation moved from passive observation to active mapping. From her position, she could track movements without tails, associations without listening devices, and logistics without breaking a single law. She noticed key cards issued minutes apart, sudden room changes, repeated taxi destinations, and synchronized departures that no guest realized were visible. Over weeks, coincidence hardened into structure. Multiple identities rotated through the hotel under different passports, couriers arrived days before high-level guests, and movements aligned with international events. To hotel management, it was normal business. To Mossad, it was a network revealing itself in plain sight. The guests believed they were invisible, passing unnoticed through a neutral space. They never considered that the woman who greeted them, remembered their names, and asked about their flights was quietly assembling a complete picture of their operation, one check-in at a time. By the fourth week, the hotel no longer felt like a workplace to the agent. It felt like a living map. Every arrival adjusted the picture, every departure confirmed or challenged a theory. She began to understand the rhythm of the building: which elevators were favored by certain guests, which entrances were avoided, and which times of day produced the most meaningful overlaps. Patterns were no longer abstract, they were predictable. Some guests never crossed paths by accident. Others seemed to arrive precisely when someone else was preparing to leave, as if the hotel itself were a relay station passing invisible batons from one hand to another. What made the operation effective was its restraint. The agent did not report every odd behavior. She transmitted only what mattered, using innocuous work-related communication channels that blended into routine hotel correspondence. A delayed maintenance request became a timing marker. A room change justified by noise complaints signaled a meeting that had shifted locations. Mossad analysts receiving the fragments on the other end did not need explanations. They reconstructed the full picture by assembling her observations like pieces of a puzzle. For the first time, they were not chasing individuals. They were watching an entire system breathe. The enemy network, confident in its anonymity, grew comfortable. That comfort was its weakness. Guests began repeating behaviors without realizing repetition creates exposure. One courier always arrived 2 days early and left before dawn. Another always requested printed invoices rather than digital copies. A senior figure preferred corner rooms but never stayed more than one night. None of this was illegal, suspicious, or dramatic on its own. Together, it formed a fingerprint. The agent memorized it all, not by writing anything down, but by associating each pattern with mundane details, voices, accents, preferred newspapers, even the way keys were placed on the counter. Pressure arrived quietly. A new hotel manager introduced stricter oversight, reviewing staff performance and guest interactions more closely. At the same time, one of the recurring guests began asking more questions than before, about staff rotations, about internal security cameras, about whether keycard data was logged centrally. The agent sensed a shift. This was no longer passive movement through the hotel, someone was testing the environment. She responded by becoming even more ordinary, making small mistakes, asking colleagues for help, appearing tired. In intelligence work, perfection attracts attention. Normality disarms it. Behind the scenes, Mossad analysts confirmed what the agent had suspected. The hotel was not just a transit point, it was a coordination node. Meetings were not happening in rooms, but through timing, arrivals signaling readiness, departures confirming completion. The receptionist was the only person who could see the entire flow without moving an inch. Yet with that advantage came risk. If even one individual connected the dots between their movements and her presence, the operation would collapse instantly, not with violence, but with exposure. The moment of real danger came unexpectedly. A guest returned to the desk late one night, visibly irritated, claiming his key card no longer worked. As she reprogrammed it, he watched her hands closely, asking casual questions that were anything but casual. Where had she worked before? How long had she been at this hotel? Did she plan to stay? The agent answered smoothly, but she recognized the tone immediately. It was not curiosity, it was assessment. When he left, she felt the rare sensation she was trained to suppress, uncertainty. Not fear, but calculation. Someone, somewhere, was starting to notice the desk. Yet the network continued to move, unaware that its invisibility was already compromised. Every check-in now added clarity, every smile reinforced the illusion. The hotel remained calm, professional, forgettable. And behind the counter, the agent maintained her role perfectly, knowing that the more invisible she became, the closer the operation moved toward its endgame. The shift from observation to consequence began without announcement. There were no dramatic changes in guest behavior, no sudden confrontations, no visible escalation. Instead, things became quieter. Fewer questions, shorter interactions. Guests who once lingered at the desk now collected their keys quickly and avoided conversation. To an ordinary receptionist, it would have felt like a relief. To the agent, it was a warning. Silence, in intelligence work, often meant recalibration. Mossad analysts confirmed what she was sensing. External surveillance teams in other countries reported parallel adjustments, routes altered, meeting points changed, identities rotated faster than before. The network had not detected her, but it had detected pressure. Someone within their structure suspected exposure, even if they could not identify the source. The hotel, once treated as a neutral corridor, was becoming a variable they no longer fully trusted. And variables are either removed or controlled. The agent adapted by doing something counterintuitive. She reduced her usefulness. She deliberately missed minor overlaps, failed to notice a few arrivals that previously would have been catalogued instantly. The goal was not to lose information, but to preserve the illusion that nothing and no one at the hotel was special. Intelligence operations rarely fail because of lack of data. They fail because someone becomes too perfect to ignore. By lowering her profile further, she allowed the network to relax again, just enough. That relaxation revealed something new. A previously unseen figure entered the picture, a man who did not fit the established patterns. He stayed irregular hours, changed rooms twice, and interacted directly with other guests in ways that broke the network's usual discipline. He was not careless, he was authoritative. Others adjusted around him. From the desk, the agent watched how his presence reshaped behavior without him issuing a single visible instruction. This was not a courier or connector. This was oversight. Identifying hierarchy without listening to conversations is one of the hardest skills in intelligence work. The agent relied on subtle cues: who waited, who deferred, who arrived early just in case. When this man checked in, taxi bookings clustered around his schedule. When he left, the hotel emptied unnaturally fast. His role became clear, not through what he said, but through how others moved when he appeared. Mossad now had something they lacked before: a living confirmation of command structure. The risk level spiked. Senior figures do not tolerate uncertainty. The agent noticed additional security measures: guests walking the lobby perimeter before approaching the desk, reflections checked in glass surfaces, pauses before speaking even routine sentences. One evening, the authoritative figure stood at the desk longer than necessary, watching her interact with another guest. He said nothing. He did not need to. The assessment was happening in real time. Internally, the agent prepared for the possibility that her usefulness was nearing its limit. Mossad doctrine is clear. Extraction is not triggered by danger alone, but by diminishing return. If staying one more day risks the entire intelligence picture, the asset is removed without hesitation. Yet for now, the flow of information remained intact, and the structure was clearer than it had ever been. The breakthrough came through an error, just not hers. A junior courier arrived early and asked for a room that did not exist under his alias. The system flagged the discrepancy, forcing the agent to ask clarifying questions. For a split second, confusion crossed his face before discipline returned. That moment was enough. It confirmed that identities were being recycled under pressure, increasing the chance of collapse. The network was compressing inward. By the end of the week, Mossad had what it needed: movement timelines, role differentiation, and confirmation of senior oversight. What remained was the most dangerous phase of all: deciding how to act without revealing how they knew. And at the center of that decision stood a receptionist who had never followed anyone, never recorded a conversation, and never once left her desk. Once the structure was clear, the operation entered its most fragile phase. Intelligence had shifted from collection to containment, and containment required restraint. Mossad did not want arrests, disruptions, or visible pressure that could expose how the network had been mapped. The goal was to let the system continue functioning, just long enough to confirm destinations, timing, and intent. For the agent behind the desk, this meant something counterintuitive: she had to become predictable. She standardized her behavior deliberately. The same greetings, the same tone, the same efficiency. No curiosity, no warmth, no irritation. Just routine. In hostile environments, consistency is camouflage. Guests stopped noticing her entirely, which was precisely what she needed. Yet behind that routine, she was watching for one thing only: deviation. Any break in established patterns now mattered more than all previous data combined. The authoritative figure returned, but this time his behavior had changed. He no longer interacted with others openly in the lobby. Meetings were staggered, arrivals spaced farther apart. The hotel was no longer a hub, it was a checkpoint. That shift signaled an approaching decision point. Networks do not tighten security unless movement is imminent. Something was about to happen beyond the hotel's walls. The first sign came from departures. Guests who normally stayed one night extended to 3. Others canceled without explanation. A few checked out and returned hours later under different names. These were not evasive maneuvers, they were rehearsals. The agent relayed the pattern with minimal detail, knowing Mossad analysts would recognize it instantly. This was not withdrawal, it was staging. At the same time, pressure returned to the desk. A request arrived from management for additional identity verification on select guests due to insurance compliance. It was routine on paper, dangerous in practice. Increased scrutiny could provoke the very attention the operation had avoided. The agent handled the process carefully, applying checks unevenly and just enough to appear compliant without triggering alarm. It was a balancing act between hotel policy and intelligence survival. The moment that nearly ended everything came late one evening. A guest approached the desk with a simple request to reprint his registration form. As the agent retrieved it, he casually mentioned a detail from her cover history that should have been irrelevant. Not incorrect, just precise. He smiled politely. She returned the smile. Internally, she adjusted her risk assessment instantly. Someone had looked into her background, not deeply enough to uncover the truth, but far enough to suggest suspicion. From that moment, she prepared for extraction. Not emotionally, operatives are trained to expect it, but operationally. She reduced transmissions, limited pattern tracking, and focused only on confirming final movements. Mossad's response was measured but decisive. Maintain position until confirmation, then disappear without explanation. That confirmation arrived quietly. A sequence of departures aligned perfectly with external intelligence feeds. Flights booked, ground transport arranged, timelines synchronized. The hotel's role was nearly finished. The agent's role even more so. Remaining longer would not add value, it would only increase exposure. On her final morning shift, nothing happened. No confrontations, no tension, just guests checking out, keys returned, receipts printed. At noon, she handed over the desk to a colleague, collected her personal items, and walked out through the same revolving doors she had passed through for months. To the hotel, she was a competent employee moving on. To the network upstairs, she never existed. Behind her, the hotel returned to being just a hotel. Ahead of her, operations based on what she had quietly built were already in motion. Extraction is rarely dramatic. There are no chases, no last-minute escapes, no backward glances. The agent's departure from the hotel was so ordinary that even she found it unsettling. She boarded public transport, followed a route she had taken many times before, and blended into the city's rhythm. Only after several controlled transitions, faces changing around her, environments shifting, time creating distance, did her operational identity dissolve completely. By the time she crossed into another jurisdiction, the receptionist no longer existed in any meaningful way. For the enemy network, the absence was imperceptible. Hotels experience staff turnover constantly. A new receptionist filled the space behind the desk, greeted guests, printed invoices, and smiled at familiar faces. The system continued to move, unaware that its most complete observer was gone. That ignorance was essential. Mossad doctrine demanded that success leave no fingerprints, not even psychological ones. If the network suspected how it had been watched, future operations elsewhere would become impossible. What followed was the delayed effect, the kind that intelligence professionals value most. Based on the timelines and role structures confirmed at the hotel, external teams intercepted movements far from the Grand Europa. Not arrests, not raids, but controlled disruptions. Missed connections, delayed shipments, routes that suddenly became unviable. Each interference appeared coincidental. Together, they fractured trust within the network. When operations fail without a visible cause, paranoia spreads faster than fear. Internally, Mossad analysts reviewed the operation not as a dramatic success, but as a methodological one. No classified technology had been used. No laws had been broken. No high-risk actions had been taken on site. A single operative, placed in a civilian role, had outperformed years of technical surveillance by doing something deceptively simple: watching how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. The agent herself did not receive public recognition. She would not. Her debrief focused on what could be replicated: the psychology of invisibility, the power of routine access, and the advantage of positions dismissed as insignificant. The lesson was clear: intelligence superiority does not always come from force or technology, but from understanding where attention naturally fades. Long after the operation concluded, the hotel continued hosting conferences, tourists, and business travelers. No plaque marked its role. No history book mentioned its name. Yet within intelligence circles, the operation became a quiet reference point, cited without detail, a reminder that the most effective surveillance platform in a building full of cameras had been a woman with a name badge and a keyboard. And somewhere else, in another city, another ordinary place was already being evaluated. Not for how secure it was, but for how invisible its observers could become. With the operation formally closed, its real impact began to surface in ways that were intentionally indirect. Intelligence work rarely ends with a single decisive moment; instead, it unfolds through echoes. The data gathered from the hotel, movement sequences, behavioral hierarchies, and timing logic, was fed into broader analytical models. Patterns that once seemed isolated suddenly aligned with activity in other countries. What had looked like a regional logistics network revealed itself as part of a wider architecture, connected by the same habits, the same mistakes, and the same confidence in anonymity. The hotel receptionist operation became a template rather than a singular success. Within Mossad, planners began reassessing environments long considered too mundane to matter: shipping offices, medical clinics, language schools, conference registration desks. Each shared the same advantage as the hotel: legitimate access, constant human interaction, and near total invisibility. The lesson was not to copy the role, but to replicate the principle. Intelligence, at its most effective, borrows the shape of normal life. The agent, meanwhile, transitioned into a different phase of her career. She did not return to field roles that required overt risk. Instead, she became a quiet authority on human pattern intelligence, training others to see what cameras and algorithms miss. Her experience reinforced an uncomfortable truth for many analysts: data is only powerful when someone understands how humans behave when they think they are unobserved. Technology records actions. People reveal intentions through habit. There was one final confirmation of success, delivered months later. An internal assessment showed that the enemy network had abandoned hotel-based coordination entirely. Routes became inefficient, communication slowed, and internal suspicion reshaped behavior. They never identified the source of compromise, but they adapted defensively, which in intelligence terms is as close to admission as one ever gets. The receptionist had not just mapped their system, she had permanently altered it. What made the operation remarkable was not its sophistication, but its humility. No heroics, no confrontation, just patience, consistency, and an understanding of human blind spots. The agent had never needed to follow anyone, threaten anyone, or even remember exact conversations. She had simply watched people move through a space they believed was neutral, forgetting that neutrality itself can be a vulnerability. Within Mossad, the operation was referenced quietly, almost casually. There was no codename spoken aloud, no mythologizing. It served as a reminder that the most effective intelligence positions are often those no one fights over, jobs people overlook because they appear small, administrative, or boring. That is where patterns live. That is where stories overlap. As intelligence services on all sides continue to invest in advanced surveillance and artificial intelligence, the receptionist operation stands as a counterbalance, a reminder that the oldest method remains undefeated. Observation, not of what people say when they are careful, but of what they do when they are comfortable. The final assessment of the operation was delivered without ceremony. No dramatic summaries, no emphasis on risk narrowly avoided. Instead, it was framed as a study in discipline, how restraint, patience, and an understanding of human behavior achieved what force never could. The report did not focus on the agent herself, but on the environment she occupied and the assumptions her presence quietly exploited. The receptionist desk had not been a weakness in the enemy network by accident. It had been a weakness by design, created by overconfidence in systems and underestimation of people. In intelligence culture, the most dangerous belief is that certain spaces are neutral. The hotel lobby, the registration form, the routine greeting. These are moments where vigilance fades. The operation demonstrated that when people believe they are in transit rather than under observation, they reveal structure through habit. Movements align, hierarchies express themselves, and intentions surface without a single word being spoken. The enemy network had protected its communications, its identities, and its locations, but not its routines. The agent's role remained unacknowledged outside a narrow circle. She did not become a legend, and she did not want to. Her success depended on the opposite, on being forgettable, replaceable, and ordinary. That, in itself, became the lesson passed on to future operatives. Visibility is not power, access is. And access is most effective when it appears meaningless. Years later, long after the hotel had changed management and decor, fragments of the operation continued to influence planning doctrine. Intelligence units began asking different questions, not, where should we watch, but, where do people stop watching themselves? The answer was rarely found in fortified buildings or encrypted channels. It was found in waiting rooms, service counters, and everyday interactions where attention drifted and patterns repeated. The story of the receptionist was never told in full, not even internally. It did not need to be. Its value lay in what it represented, a shift in thinking. A reminder that in a world obsessed with speed and spectacle, the quiet observer often wins. The agent had not infiltrated the enemy by force or deception alone, but by patience and presence, by becoming part of the background until the background itself began to speak. And somewhere, at this very moment, another lobby hums with ordinary activity. Keys change hands. Names are exchanged. Movements align. Someone smiles politely from behind a desk, unnoticed, unremembered, while history quietly takes shape in front of them.